You can't lock me out of my own house.
Your house? Your name was never on this deed. You're throwing out a pregnant woman! No, dear. I'm keeping what's mine. You planned this to humiliate us. You tried to have me declared insane to steal my home. I just read the paperwork first. My son stood in the kitchen I had cooked in for 31 years, and he told me I could not lock him out of a room in his own house. I set my coffee down real slow, the way you do when you have already made up your mind about something, and the other person just does not know it yet. And I looked at him and I said, "Us? Danny, honey, there is no us on this deed. There is my grandmother and my mother and me. Your daddy married into this house. And you were just a guest who got a little too comfortable." He went white as a bedsheet. Not because I had changed a lock, because for the first time in his whole easy life, he realized he had never once read the only piece of paper that ever mattered. And that, standing there in my kitchen, with the coffee going cold and the locksmith's truck backing out of my driveway, that was not even the worst thing he and his wife were hiding from me. My name is Frances Kavanaugh. Most folks around here just call me Fran. I am 68 years old. I live in a little town about 40 minutes outside Columbus, Ohio. And for 40 years, I made my living finding the truth that people bury deep down inside their own numbers. If you are listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please stay with me until the end. Because what I did to the two people who tried to file me away into the small room down the hall, I did before the eggs were even cold. And I am going to tell you every last piece of how it happened. Let me start with who I am, because it explains just about everything that comes after. I was a CPA, an accountant. I did the books for half this town at one point or another. The hardware store, both diners on Main, the funeral home, 3 churches, the little machine shop out by the highway, and more scared young couples with a shoebox full of crumpled receipts than I could ever hope to count. When I started out back in the 70s, I was usually the only woman in the room, and the men across the table had a real bad habit of talking to me like I was the girl who fetched the coffee. One fella actually asked me to go find the accountant while I was sitting there with his whole tax return open in front of me. I just smiled and said, "You are looking at her sugar, and now you owe the IRS $4,000. Would you like to hear why?" That was fine by me, all of it. I let them think whatever they wanted. Because here is what people never understand about my line of work. They think accounting is boring. They think it is just adding up little columns of numbers all day. Let me tell you something worth writing down. Numbers are the most honest thing in this entire world. A person will lie right to your face and smile the whole time they do it. They will hug you at the funeral and pick your pocket clean at the will reading. But numbers do not care how you feel. They do not care about your sad story or your good intentions or who in the room thinks they deserve what. A number is a number. It just sits there on the page telling you the plain truth, patient as a stone, waiting for somebody with the sense to actually read it. And for 40 years, folks paid me good money to dig out the truth they had buried in their own ledgers. Sometimes it was an honest mistake. Sometimes it was a business partner skimming a little off the top every Friday, thinking nobody would notice. Because who watches the pennies? I watch the pennies. The pennies are where the bodies are buried. Once you learn to read a ledger like that, you never really stop reading. It gets into you. You read everything. The way a man will not look at his wife when the numbers come up short. The way a woman goes quiet when you ask a simple question about the household account. People included, especially people. That is the one thing my own family never got about me. They looked at a soft-spoken widow in a cardigan who baked banana bread on Sundays and kept quiet and let things slide, and they figured, well, she is harmless. Bless her heart. She has not really been all there since Walt passed. Poor Fran, she is slipping. Now let me tell you something for free. Being underestimated is the finest cover a woman ever had in this life. People will say things right in front of you that they would never in a million years say to your face, long as they have decided you are not really paying attention anymore. My daughter-in-law said a whole lot of things in front of me. So did my son. They talked over my head and around me,
and about me like I was a lamp in the corner. And I heard every single word of it. I always do. That is the job. That was always the job. I have got one sister left, Jean, 2 years younger than me, lives out in Indiana with her cat and her crossword puzzles. Now you are going to want to remember Jean. She matters later on in this story, and I am sorry to say it is not in the way you would hope. But before the locks and the lawyers, before any of the good part, you've got to understand this house. Because everything in the story starts and ends right here, under this roof, with the man who married into it. I married Walt Kavanaugh in the spring of 1983, and I need to be real clear about something because it is the beating heart of this whole Walt did not build this house. Walt did not buy this house. Walt did not inherit one single nail of this house. Walt married into it. This was my grandmother's house first. She and my grandfather put the money down on it back before the war, and she raised my mother inside these four walls. Then my mother raised me in them. And when Mama finally passed, it came down to me, free and clear, my name and nobody else's, the exact same way it had always come down in my family, mother to daughter, 3 generations of women who understood in their bones that the roof over your head is the one thing on this earth you never ever sign away just to keep some other person comfortable. When Walt and I got married, he carried his boots and his flannel shirts and his good toolbox in through that front door, and not one single day of our 40 years together did he ever pretend it was anything other than what it was. He used to joke down at the VFW that he was the luckiest man in the whole county because he went and married himself a woman with a paid-off house and a good head for money, and what more could a man possibly ask for? Walt was not a numbers man, God love him. Walt was a hands man. He could fix anything you put in front of him that had a motor in it, and he could coax anything green right up out of the dirt. The love letter that man wrote me was not on any piece of paper. It was the greenhouse he built out back with his own 2 hands, board by board, pane by pane, one whole summer of him out there sweating and cussing at crooked framing, so that his wife could have fresh tomatoes and basil and even a few roses clear into November when the rest of the county had nothing but frost. To this very day, I cannot walk into that greenhouse without the smell of it just knocking the wind clean out of me. Warm dirt and tomato leaf and rain coming down soft on the glass overhead, that smell is Walt. That is the whole of him right there. And out in the front yard, there is a sugar maple that my grandmother planted with her own hands the year my mother was born. It is a giant of a thing now, taller than the house. Every single October, it turns the whole yard the color of a brush fire, orange and red and gold, and the leaves come down like it is snowing embers. 3 generations of my family have raked their leaves under that tree. My mother taught me to jump in the piles under that tree. I taught Danny the same when he was small and sweet and had not learned yet to want easy more than he wanted right. Walt caught a cough in the fall a year and a half back. We figured it was just a cold hanging on. Then it was a scan. Then it was a word none of us wanted to say out loud in the kitchen. Then it was 4 months that went by, faster than 4 months has any earthly right to go. He was never a man for big speeches, my Walt. But near the very end, in that hospital bed with all those machines beeping around him, he took my hand and he said the strangest thing to me. He said, Fran, I need you to promise me one thing. Do not ever let anybody else keep your books. Not the accounts, not this house, not any of it. You keep every bit of it in your own hand. You hear me. At the time, I honestly thought it was the medicine talking, a dying accountant's husband getting sentimental about paperwork at the end. What a thing to spend one of your last good sentences on, I thought. I understand it different now. I understand it was maybe the clearest, sharpest thing that man ever said to me in 40 years. Because Walt had spent all that time quietly, watching our boy grow up into a man who loved easy a whole lot more than he loved right. And Walt had watched, real close and real quiet, the woman that boy went off and married. I believe with my entire heart that my husband saw exactly what was rolling down the road toward me, saw it clear as a headlight long before I would ever let myself look at it. Now I need to be fair about my son here, because the part of all this that still aches the most, even now, is not the daughter-in-law. It is Danny. Danny is not a cruel man. He is a weak one. And those are two very different things, even if they can end up doing you the exact same damage. He is sweet-natured. He is funny. He cried harder than anybody standing at his father's graveside. He has also spent his entire life taking whichever road had the fewest bumps in it. Path of least resistance every single time, since he was a little boy who would rather agree with you than argue, even when he knew you were dead wrong. And somewhere along the line, he went and married himself, who took that softness of his and turned it into a steering wheel she could drive wherever she pleased. Her name is Brooke, and I am not going to sit here and paint her up as some cartoon villain twirling a mustache, because honestly, the truth of Brooke is a good deal sadder than that. Brooke grew up with not much of anything at all, and somewhere in there she decided, the way some folks do, that the cure for that was to look for the rest of her life like she had always had plenty. She curates. That is the fancy word for it these days. Their old apartment across town looked like a page torn out of a magazine, the kind of place nobody is actually allowed to live in. Everything white and breakable, and just so. When she got pregnant, why? The baby became the next big project. The designer nursery. The registry full of brand names I could not begin to pronounce. $300 for a bassinet a baby uses for 4 months. Underneath all that fuss and all that performing, though, I have come to believe that Brooke is just plain scared. Scared the way people get when they have decided somewhere deep down that their whole entire worth is on display out there in the shop window and could get repossessed at any minute if they slip up even once. And scared people grab. They look around a room for the one thing that might make them feel safe and solid, and they reach right out for it, and then they tell themselves a real pretty little story about why they had it coming to them all along. Well, they looked around and they reached out and they grabbed for my house. And as I would find out soon enough, sitting up in the dark listening, they had a much darker reason to reach for it than I ever would have guessed. It started the way these things pretty much always start. Dressed up, nice and neat as helping. 14 months ago, right after we put Walt in the cold ground, Danny and Brooke were between leases, and there I was, a brand new widow rattling around inside a 4-bedroom house all by my lonesome. And it made all the sense in the world, did it not, for the two of them to move on in. Just for a little while, Mom. Just till we get back on our feet. Just till the baby comes and we save up a bit. And I was grateful. I will say that part plain, because it is true, and because I am not too proud to admit it. Those first few weeks, having them in the house with me was about the only thing that got me up out of bed in the mornings at all. The silence in a house, after 40 years of somebody else breathing in it, will about kill you, and they filled it up, and I loved them for it. Brooke was not even unkind at the start. She was careful with me, gentle even, the way you are careful with something when you are not quite sure yet how fragile it is, or how easy it might break. Then the baby showed up on a little plastic test strip, 2 pink lines, and everything in that house began to shift. And here is the cruel thing about how it shifts. It goes so slow, so gentle, so reasonable, one small step at a time, that you do not even catch it happening while it happens. First it was, gosh, Walt's old work boots by the back door are kind of a tripping hazard now, aren't they? With me carrying the baby and all. Fair enough, I thought. Then it was the tools out in the greenhouse, all boxed up nice and tidy into cartons I could not begin to lift to make room for storage, she said. Then the family photographs, the whole hallway of them, Danny in his Little League uniform, Walt and me on our wedding day, my mother as a young woman on the front porch. They all came quietly down off the walls and got put away somewhere safe for the nursery vibe, she said. Then my mother's good china, the very set my grandmother used to serve Sunday dinner on, went right up into the cabinet over the refrigerator, the one I would need to drag a step stool over just to reach, and in its place came a matching set of plain white dishes that Brooke liked a whole lot better. My own kitchen. The kitchen where I had made 31 years of breakfast for my family. It slowly, politely, one reasonable little adjustment at a time, stopped being a room that I recognized at all. I would go to reach for the coffee in the morning, and it had moved to a new shelf. I would go to sit down in my own chair at my own table, the table my grandmother ate at, and there would be a folded muslin blanket sitting right in my spot, like the room itself had already quietly voted and decided I was a visitor here now, a guest. And I told myself the very same thing every decent mother on this earth tells herself: it is not about me. Do not go making this about me, Fran. A pregnant woman has every right to feather her nest. Just be grateful they are here at all. Just be glad you are not alone. That right there, that is the trap. That is the whole entire trap. And I walked into it with my eyes wide open, calling it love. They count on your love to make you swallow your own 2 cents. They count on you being too decent a mother to ever make a scene about a coffee cup or a chair. And little by little, so slow you never feel the knot pull tight, your own good manners get turned into the leash they walk you around the block on. I had been walking on that leash for 14 months, quiet as you please, and calling the whole thing grace. And then on a Thursday over pot roast came the guest room. It was a Thursday. And I remember that because I had made a pot roast, and pot roast is a Thursday sort of meal, slow and heavy and meant to keep you at the table a while. Danny had that look on his face all through supper, the careful look. The one he has been getting since he was about 9 years old, the look of a boy who has been handed a note by somebody else and told to read it out loud and is dreading it. He kept pushing his carrots around the plate. Brooke kept touching his arm, little pats, go on, go on. And I sat there and I ate my roast and I waited, because I have sat across a whole lot of tables from a whole lot of people working up the nerve to tell me something they already knew I would not like. After the plates were cleared, and is it not always after the plates are cleared? Once they figure you are good and softened up with a hot meal, Danny cleared his throat about 4 times and finally got it out. Mom, he said, Brooke and I have been talking about the layout, with the baby coming and everything. And the thing is, we really need the big room, the master, for the crib and the changing table and all the stuff. There is just so much stuff, Mom, you would not believe it. And there is just more space in there. And honestly, the guest room down the hall is real cozy. You would have your own bathroom right off it. You would not have to share. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. 3 little words that have moved more mothers out of their own lives than any eviction notice a court ever printed. It just makes sense. Like it was arithmetic. Like it was something I could check on a calculator and see for myself that, of course, the woman who owns the house should take the smallest room in it so the crib has somewhere to go. I looked over at Brooke. She had her hand resting on the curve of her belly, and she was already looking at the walls of a room she had not been given yet, already measuring, already picking out the paint. And I felt something move in my chest that I had not felt in 14 long months of fog and grief and going along to get along. I cannot rightly describe it except to say the fog thinned out a little, just a little, enough to see through. But I did not show a single thing on my face. You do not spend 40 years across the table from men lowballing you, from folks lying about their deductions, from crooked partners swearing up and down the register just came out short on its own, without learning how to hold your face perfectly still while your mind goes to work underneath it. My face is an instrument. I have played it for 4 decades, so I smiled at my son, warm as I could make it, and I said, "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever is easiest for you all. Let me sleep on it and we will sort out the rooms this weekend." Danny let out this big breath like I had reached over and unhooked something heavy off of him. Brooke actually smiled at me, the first real warm smile she had aimed my way in weeks, and it was the warm smile of a person who has just gotten exactly the thing they wanted and can afford to be generous about it now. "Thank you, Fran," she said. "It really is better for everyone. Better for everyone." I turned that phrase over a few times going up the stairs that night. Better for everyone. Well, we would see about the everyone part. Now here is where I have to be honest with you, because I promised you the whole truth and not the tidy version. I did not go up those stairs certain. I did not lie down in my bed with some grand plan already burning in my head. That is not how it happened. And anybody who tells you they went straight from hurt to a battle plan is selling you something. I went up those stairs confused and rattled. And if I am being real with you, a little bit ashamed of myself, because part of me was already scolding me. "Fran, you old fool, It is a bedroom. It is a bigger room for a baby. What is the matter with you? Are you really going to make a stink over which four walls you sleep inside of when your grandbaby needs the space? But I could not shake it. And I want you to understand exactly why I could not shake it, because it is the whole point of me. I am an auditor, 40 years, and there is a feeling an auditor gets, way down in the gut, long before the mind can prove a single thing. It is the feeling you get when the numbers stop adding up, when the totals are technically fine, but the shape of the thing is wrong. When somebody hands you a clean set of books and every column balances, and you still know, you just know that money is walking out a back door somewhere. It is not a thought, it is a smell. And lying there in the dark that Thursday night, staring up at the ceiling of the bedroom my mother died in, I smelled it. Something in this house was not adding up, and I had been too deep in my grief to run the numbers. I did not sleep much. Somewhere around 1 in the morning, I gave up on it, and I got up to go down and get myself a glass of water, quiet in my slippers, the way you learn to move through your own house in the dark after 68 years of living in it. And that is when I heard my son. He was out in the garage. The door from the kitchen to the garage was open a crack, and there was a light on out there. And Danny was on his phone, talking low, the way a man talks when he does not want the sound to carry into the house. And most of it did not carry. I want to be clear about that, because I am not going to sit here and pretend I stood at a heating vent and heard a whole conspiracy laid out neat for me like they do in the movies. I did not. I caught pieces, fragments, the way you catch a couple words of a song from a passing car. I heard him say, "No, no, I hear you. I am handling it." I heard him say, "We are close. Okay, just give me a little more time. These things take time." And then, real quiet, real tired, I heard my son say, "Look, the house is basically the only asset left, all right. Once it is in my name, we can put it up as collateral and refinance the whole thing. I just need it in my name first." And then he said the part that put ice in me. He said, "She is not going to argue about a bedroom. Trust me, Mom does not fight about anything anymore." I stood there in my own dark kitchen in my slippers with an empty water glass in my hand, and I did not move for a long, long time. I did not go get my water. I went back up the stairs one at a time, careful, and I got back into my bed, and I lay there with my heart going like a rabbit. And here is the ugly, honest part. My very first feeling was not anger. I wish I could tell you it was. My first feeling was that I was a crazy old woman. That is the truth. I lay there and I told myself, "Fran, you heard 4 words of a phone call at 1 in the morning. You do not know who he was talking to. You do not know what he meant. Collateral, refinance. That could be anything. That could be his truck. That could be some business thing. That could be nothing. You are a grieving widow imagining a monster because you got your feelings hurt about a bedroom. You should be ashamed." That is exactly what you sound like. That is exactly what a paranoid old woman sounds like. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because this is the trap inside the trap. They had spent 14 months quietly teaching everyone, including me, that Fran was not quite right anymore. Fran was slipping. And they had done such a fine job of it that when I finally heard the truth with my own 2 ears, my very first instinct was to call myself the liar, to protect them, to doubt myself instead of my own son. That is how good the con was. That is how deep it went. So I did the only thing I know how to do when I do not trust my own gut. I stopped trusting my gut and I went and got the numbers. Because here is the thing my family forgot about the sweet old lady baking banana bread in the corner. Before I was anybody's mother or anybody's widow, I was the best forensic accountant in 3 counties, and you do not lose that. You do not lose it any more than a fighter loses his hands. It goes quiet, maybe. It does not go away. The next morning, I started doing what I had done for 40 years for other people. I started reading. And the first place you read, the very first place always is the mail. People are so careful about their phones and their laptops and their passwords. And then they leave the whole truth of their lives sitting right there in the mailbox at the end of the driveway. I had stopped even looking at the mail since Walt died. Brooke had taken it over, said she did not want me bothered with all the junk. Wasn't that thoughtful of her? So I started getting to the mailbox first. I am up before 5 anyway, always have been, and it did not take me but a few days. There was an envelope, not addressed to me, addressed to Daniel Kavanaugh. And I know, you are not supposed to open another person's mail, and I did not open it. I did not have to. Because the return address, right there in the corner, was a company called Keystone Advance. And I sat down at my grandmother's kitchen table, and I felt every one of my 40 years come up out of the floor and into my spine because I knew exactly what Keystone Advance was. Let me explain it to you the way I would explain it to a client, so you understand what I was looking at. A merchant cash advance. That is the polite name for it. What it really is a loan that is not legally a loan, so it does not have to follow the rules that loans follow. A business gets desperate, cannot get money from a real bank because the numbers are already too ugly, and along comes an outfit like Keystone offering fast cash. No problem, sign right here. And what you sign, buried in there, is a thing called a confession of judgment. What that means in plain English is that you sign away your right to even fight them in court. You agree in advance that you are guilty. So the day you fall behind, and you will fall behind, that is the whole business model. They do not have to sue you and prove anything. They already have your signature saying they win. They just walk into a courthouse and file it. And now there is a judgment against you. And now they can come for your accounts, your assets, whatever they can find with your name on it. I did not have to open that envelope to know my son was in trouble with the exact worst kind of people you can be in trouble with. But knowing the shape of the trouble was not enough for me. I am an accountant. I needed the number. I needed to know how deep the water was. So I went and got it. And here is a thing most folks do not know, a thing that being in my line of work teaches you real fast. When somebody files one of these judgments or takes out one of these advances secured against a business, a whole lot of it is public record. It gets filed. There are these things called UCC filings, Uniform Commercial Code, and they are how a lender tells the whole world, hey, I have got a claim on this person's stuff. Get in line behind me. And you can look them up. Anybody can. You just have to know where to look and not be scared of a county clerk's office. And honey, I have never once in my life been scared of a county clerk's office. That is my church. I drove down to the county recorder on a Tuesday morning, and I told them I was doing some research, which was the God's honest truth. And I sat at one of those little public terminals with my reading glasses on, and I pulled the thread, and the thread just kept coming. Keystone was not the only one. There was Keystone, and there was another outfit out of Delaware, and there was a lien from a supplier my son had stiffed, and there was the ghost of a business, some contracting company Danny had started that I did not even know had failed, that had gone down owing everybody in sight. And when I added it all up, sitting there in that quiet room that smelled like old paper and floor wax, when I did the one thing my whole family was sure I could not do anymore and added up the numbers, the total made me put my glasses down and press my fingers into my eyes. They were not a little behind. They were drowning. They were 3 months behind on people who do not send you a polite little reminder in the mail, people who had my son's signature saying he had already lost. And the total was more money than most folks in this town have seen in years. And all at once, sitting in that room, I understood the whole thing, and it was so much sadder and so much colder than I had let myself believe. My son and his wife were not entitled little brats rearranging the furniture because they thought they deserved better. They were two terrified people who had gotten themselves into water way over their heads, and they had looked around for something to grab onto. And what they saw was a paid-off house and a widow they had already spent 14 months convincing everyone was not all there. They saw a life raft, and they had climbed halfway fluent already, so gently and so slowly that I had helped them do it and called it grace. But here is the thing. Here is the thing they had bet the whole farm on, and never once, not one single time, bothered to actually check. That house was never theirs to grab, and there was not a soul in this family who had ever gone and read the deed. Now you might be asking yourself the same thing I asked myself. If they never checked, why on earth were they so sure? Why would a grown man just assume a whole house was coming to him, sure enough to borrow against it in his head? And the answer to that is the part that is genuinely my own fault, and I will own it. Years ago, back when Danny was in college and Walt and I were healthy and it all felt very far away, I did what every responsible person is supposed to do. I made a will, a simple one. And in that will, of course, I left everything to my only child. The house, the savings, all of it, to Danny. Why would I not? He was my whole world. And Danny knew about that will because we had told him, the way you tell your kid, do not worry. It is all handled. It will all come to you someday. We have got it in writing. And somewhere in there, I think, my grandmother had said something like it too, years and years back. Some Thanksgiving, someday this old place will be little Danny's. Nice words. Grandmother words. So in his head and in Brooke's head, it was settled. It was in writing. It was promised. The house was as good as theirs, just waiting on the sad formality of me dying. Except a will does not do one single thing while you are still breathing. That is what they forgot. That is what folks always forget. A will is not a deed. A will does not give you a house today. It gives you a house maybe, someday, if it is still the will by the time the person passes. And a will can be changed. A will can be torn right up and thrown in the trash on any Tuesday morning that the person who wrote it decides to. My name and my name alone was on that deed today, right now, and a promise about someday does not move a living woman out of her own bedroom, which left them with a problem, a real ticking problem, because they did not have someday. They had 3 months behind and getting worse. They needed the house now, in his name now, so they could borrow against it and get Keystone and all the rest of them off their backs before it all came crashing down. And you cannot inherit a house from a woman who is still very much alive and, worse yet, still very much in her right mind. So how do you take a house from a living woman who is in a hurry? I found out the answer to that in the cereal aisle of the Kroger, and it was the coldest morning of my whole life. I had gone in for the oat milk that Jean likes because Jean was maybe going to come visit, and I was standing there in the cereal aisle with my little cart, and 2 aisles over I heard Brooke. She was on the phone, and she was not bothering to keep her voice down at all, because why would she, in her mind, the only person in the family worth worrying about, was safe at home being a lamp in the corner? And I heard her say something I am going to carry with me until the day I die. She said, "No, the doctor route is cleaner than fighting her on it. If we can just get her looked at, get it down on paper that she is not really all there, then it does not matter what she wants or does not want. It stops being her decision. Somebody responsible gets put in charge of her affairs." And her affairs, she said, and I swear I heard her almost laugh, her affairs are the house. And I stood there in that cereal aisle holding a carton of oat milk, and I finally understood what my daughter-in-law had been building for 14 patient months. All those sweet, worried little texts to the cousins and to Jean. Poor Fran, she is so confused lately. Poor Fran, she is making rash decisions. She is not herself since Walt. She left the stove on again, bless her heart. I had thought when I noticed it at all that it was just gossip. It was not gossip. It was a record. It was exhibits. She was building a case, brick by careful brick, so that when the day came, there would be a whole chorus of people who already believed it, ready to nod along. They did not just want my bedroom. That was never the point of the bedroom. The bedroom was just the first entry in a ledger they were keeping on me. See how she agreed to move to the small room. That is a woman who cannot manage a household anymore. See how confused she gets. See how she needs somebody to take charge. They did not want me in the guest room. They wanted me declared. I drove home from that Kroger with my hands perfectly steady on the wheel and a gallon of oat milk sweating in the seat beside me. And somewhere on the road between the store and my grandmother's house, something happened inside of me that I have only ever felt a handful of times in my whole life. The confusion went away. The shame went away. The little scolding voice that kept calling me a paranoid old woman, that went away too. And in the empty space where all of that had been, something else came up, cool and quiet and clear as well water. I do not know a better word for it than certainty. I want to be careful how I say this, because I do not want you to hear rage. It was not rage. Rage is loud and rage is hot, and rage makes you do things at the top of the stairs that you regret at the bottom of them. Rage is exactly what they were counting on, if you want to know the truth. A furious old woman screaming about her bedroom, throwing a fit, making a scene in front of the cousins. That would have been the best gift I could have handed my daughter-in-law. That would have been exhibit number 1. See how erratic she is. See how she flew off the handle. See how she needs looking after. No. What came up in me on that drive home was not rage. It was the other thing. It was the stillness. It was the exact feeling I used to get right before I walked into a conference room and laid a folder on the table that was going to end somebody's career. The feeling of a person who has stopped hoping and started knowing. And here is the thing about a woman like me that Brooke, for all her careful planning, never once figured into her arithmetic. She had a story. She had a doctor she was going to find, and a chorus of worried relatives, and a nice man somewhere, no doubt, telling her exactly how these guardianship things are done. That is what she had. Do you know what I had? I had 40 years of knowing how paper works. I had spent my whole life in the machinery she was only just now learning the name of. She thought she was bringing a case against a confused old lady. She had no earthly idea she was about to go up against the best forensic accountant in 3 counties, on my home turf, with my own name on the deed. I slept that night like a stone dropped down a well. I want you to know that. After weeks of lying awake, the very night I decided what I was going to do, I slept 9 hours straight and woke up before my alarm feeling 20 years younger. That is how you know a decision is the right one. Your body tells you before your head does. My body was done being tired. I was up before 5, the way I always am, and I came down the stairs into my own dark kitchen, and I did something first, before anything else, just for the plain pleasure of it. I put my house back. I dragged the step stool over to the cabinet above the refrigerator, and I got down my mother's good china, my grandmother's china, and I put it back on the low shelf where it had always lived, where I could reach it. I went and I found the box of family photographs Brooke had tucked away for the nursery vibe, and I hung Danny in his Little League uniform back on the wall in the hallway, and Walt and me on our wedding day, and my mother young on the porch, and I hammered the little nails back into the same holes they had lived in for 30 years. And then I made a pot of real coffee, the good kind, and I sat down at my grandmother's table under the window that looks out on the maple, and I went to work. The first call I made, right at 7 when her office opened, was to Ellen Pruitt. Now, Ellen is an estate attorney, been practicing in this county longer than almost anybody, 71 years old, and she does not suffer fools any better than I do. Ellen had done Walt's and my paperwork years back, and she had handled some things after Walt passed. I did not go to Ellen because I thought I knew the law. That is the important part, and I want to say it plain because I am nobody's hero in a movie. I am an accountant, not a lawyer. I know money, and I know paper, and I know how to read a filing, but the law is its own animal, and I know exactly enough about it to know when I am out of my depth and need somebody smarter than me holding the wheel. So I called Ellen, and I told her I needed to see her that week, and I needed her to clear some real time because we had a great deal of very careful work to do. The second call was to Rosa. Rosa came up under me 20 years ago, green as spring grass, and she is a CPA now with her own practice, and she is one of maybe 3 people on this earth I would trust with the truth about my own family. I told Rosa I had a forensic job for her, an ugly one, close to home, and I needed her to help me build a clean and complete picture of my son's finances, every filing, every judgment, every dollar, documented and dated and organized the way she and I both knew how to organize a thing so that it could stand up in front of anybody. Rosa did not ask me a single nosy question. She just said, "When do we start, Fran? That is a friend." And then, with the coffee still warm in the pot, I made a third call, and this was the one that put the whole thing in motion for real. I called a locksmith. Now, I need to say something here, because I know some of you are already worried I did something I was not allowed to do, and I did not. And the reason I did not is the whole point of who I am. You cannot just lock people out of a house they have been living in. I knew that. Any accountant who has ever watched a landlord get himself sued knows that. If those 2 had been sleeping in that house for 14 months, and they had, then legally they were tenants, whether anybody ever signed a lease or not. and you do not get to change the locks on the front door and put a grown pregnant woman out on the lawn. That is against the law, and doing it would have handed them the exact victim story they were dying for. So that is not what I did. What I did was have that locksmith change the lock on 2 doors, and 2 doors only. The master bedroom, my room, the very room they had already picked out for a nursery, and the little back office off the kitchen, the room with my desk and my files, and Walt's old safe in the closet, the room where the deed lived and the will, and every financial record I owned. My rooms, the rooms that held the truth. I was not putting anybody out of the house. I was just taking back the 2 rooms that were nobody's business but mine, and I was doing it in a way not one lawyer alive could call illegal. The locksmith was pulling out of my driveway around 7:40, and I was standing at the stove making French toast because I am still their mother and I still make breakfast. When Danny came down following the smell of cinnamon and coffee rubbing his eyes, and the first thing he saw was that truck backing out, and the second thing he saw when he tried the office door on his way past was that his key did not turn. He came into the kitchen looking confused. Then he went and tried the master bedroom door, and I heard the knob rattle. And then he came back into the kitchen looking a whole lot less sleepy. "Mom," he said, "why is the office locked? Why is your room locked? Who was that?" I flipped a piece of French toast, real calm, and I said, "That was a locksmith, honey." And I looked up at him, and I want you to know I loved him even then. Even standing there in my kitchen, having heard what I had heard, I looked at my boy and I loved him. And then I said the thing. "You cannot lock us out of a room in our own house," he said, before I could even get there, and his voice had an edge in it I had not heard from him in years. And that is when I set my coffee down real slow, and I said it. "Us," I said. "Danny, honey, there is no us on this deed. There is my grandmother and my mother and me. Your daddy married into this house, and you were just a guest who got a little too comfortable. He went white as a bed sheet." I have described that moment already at the start because it is the moment the whole thing turns on. And now you understand what was behind it, all of it, the phone call and the mailbox and the county recorder and the cereal aisle. He was not white because of a lock. He was white because in that 1 second he understood all at once that the thing he had bet his whole future on, the house he had borrowed against in his own head, the life raft, was a thing he had never actually read the paperwork on, not once in 38 years. And now his mother, the confused old lady, the lamp in the corner, was standing at the stove telling him she had read it very carefully indeed. Brooke came down then, in her robe, and she took one look at Danny's face and the locked doors, and she knew something had gone wrong, and her eyes went sharp and quick the way they do. "Is everything okay?" she said, in that bright voice folks use when they are certain it is not. "More than okay," I said. "Sit down, both of you. Eat something. We have got a lot to talk about, and you do not do the hard things on an empty stomach. Now here is a thing I want you to notice, because it matters for what comes later. I did not tell them what I knew. Not that morning. I did not say the word keystone. I did not say the word conservatorship. I did not say I had been to the county recorder, or that I had heard her in the Kroger, or that I knew down to the dollar how deep they were in. I just told them, plain and calm, that the house was mine, that it had always been mine, that I was not moving into any guest room, and that things were going to be different now. I let them think it was about a bedroom. I let them think their sweet mother had finally gotten stubborn about the wrong thing. Because I am an accountant, and an accountant does not show you the whole audit at the first meeting. You hold your findings. You let the other side keep talking, keep moving, keep making their little mistakes, right up until the day you lay the whole folder on the table at once. I was holding my folder. It was not time yet. They did not eat the French toast, neither one of them. And then the campaign started, right on schedule, and it did not come from Danny. It came from Brooke, and it came fast, and it came exactly the way I knew it would. By that afternoon, my phone was buzzing. First, it was Brooke herself, all wounded gentleness, Fran. "I really think you are making a rash decision in a very emotional time. Grief does strange things to people. Please do not do anything you will regret." Then an hour later, it was a cousin I had not spoken to since Christmas, calling to say she just wanted to check in on me. She had heard I was under a lot of stress. Then that evening, it was a voicemail from Brooke's own mother, a woman I have met exactly twice in my life, saying in this syrupy voice how concerned she was about my state of mind, dear, and how she hoped I had someone looking out for me. I recognized the shape of it the way you recognize a contract you have read 100 times before you even get to the signature line. This was not a family worried about a grieving widow. This was a record being built in real time right in front of me. Rash, emotional, not herself, grief, state of mind. Those are not the words of people checking on you, honey. Those are exhibits. Those are the things you line up before a hearing. I had watched it happen once, years back, to a client of mine I was fond of. A tidy little paper trail of concerned incidents that by the end described a decline that had never actually happened. I knew this playbook cold, and I knew the only thing on this earth that beats it. Not noise, not tears, not a screaming fight that makes you look exactly as unstable as they are claiming you are. The only thing that beats it is clean paper and a calm voice. But there was one call that got through my guard, and I am not too proud to tell you it hurt me more than all the rest of them put together. It was Jean, my sister. 2 days into all of this, Jean called me from Indiana, and her voice was all wrong, careful and thin. And she said, honey, I have been talking to Brooke, and I need to ask you something, and I need you to not get upset. Have you talked to anybody before deciding all this? A professional, maybe, somebody who could just, make sure you are thinking clearly. Because Brooke says you have been having a hard time, and I love you, and I just want to be sure. And I sat down in Walt's old chair with the phone against my ear, and for the first time in the whole ordeal, I felt tears come up hot behind my eyes. Because they had gotten to Jean, my baby sister, the one person left on this earth who has known me since before I could walk, and they had spun her up so good that she was sitting out there in Indiana wondering if her big sister had lost her marbles. That is how much damage a patient liar can do in 14 months. That is the real cost of it. It is not just the house. It is that they will poison the well between you and the people who love you. And they will do it while smiling and calling it concern. I did not yell at Jean. I wanted to, but I did not, and thank God I did not. Instead, I did the thing I do. I said, Jean, I am going to send you some papers. Do not take my word for anything. Do not take Brooke's word for anything either. Just read the papers I send you with your own eyes, and then you tell me who in this family is not thinking clearly. And I mailed my sister a clean copy of everything Rosa and I had pulled, the UCC filings, the judgments, the dead contracting company, the whole ugly total laid out plain. I did not add a word of commentary. I just let the numbers do what numbers do. And 2 days later, Jean called me back, and this time her voice was a different thing entirely, low and furious and cracking, and she said, Francis, what have they done? And just like that, I had my sister back, all the way back and on my side. But I want you to understand, it cost me something to get her back. It cost me a phone call where my own baby sister asked me if I had lost my mind. You do not get that back for free. While all that was going on, Ellen and I got to work, and I need to be honest that this part was not quick, and it was not cheap, and it was not one dramatic afternoon like it looks in the stories. It was weeks. It was a lot of driving to Ellen's office, and a lot of my own money, and a lot of me sitting across a conference table, doing what I had made a whole career telling other people to do, which is the slow, boring, unglamorous work of getting your paper in order before you ever fire a shot. The very first thing Ellen had me do was the smartest thing anybody ever told me to do in my life. She slid a card across the table, a board-certified geriatrician up in Columbus, and she said, Fran, before we do one other thing, you are going to go get a full cognitive evaluation, a real one, dated, signed, sealed, because they are laying the groundwork for a capacity petition. It is groundwork, and the way you make that whole line of attack impossible is you get a doctor to put it in writing. Right now, while it is clearly true that there is not one single thing wrong with your mind, so that if anybody ever stands up in a courtroom and breathes the word incompetent, you hand the judge one piece of paper that ends the conversation before it starts. So I went and I took the test, and let me tell you, it was 2 hours long and it had no mercy in it. and it did not care one bit that I used to be good at numbers. Memory, judgment, drawing a clock, counting backward by sevens, recalling a list of words 20 minutes later, all of it, and the report came back exactly the way I already knew it would. Cognition intact across all domains. No impairment, not a trace, sealed and dated. I read that report sitting in my car in the doctor's parking lot, and I laughed out loud alone because they had spent 14 months telling the whole world I was losing my mind, and it turned out the only problem with my mind was that it was working just fine. Then Ellen and I built the wall, a revocable living trust, with every asset I owned moved in behind it, the house included, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare directive. And when Ellen asked me the question, every one of these documents makes you answer, which is who do you name, who stands in for you, if you ever truly can stand in for yourself, who gets to make the calls? I did not name my son, and I did not name his wife. I named Jean, my sister, who had asked me if I was crazy, and then read the papers and turned furious onto my side. And I named Ellen herself, two women who had earned it, and the moment I signed that trust quietly, in Ellen's office on an ordinary Wednesday, that old will, the one that left everything to Danny, the one he and Brooke had been counting on like money in the bank, that will was revoked, gone, torn up and thrown in the trash on a Tuesday, just like I told you a will can be. Supersede is the legal word Ellen used. I like the plain word better. Gone. And then I did the one thing in this whole story that had absolutely nothing to do with protecting myself, and I want to tell you about it carefully, because it is the part people misunderstand. There was a baby coming, a real one due in about 2 months, who had not done one single thing wrong, who did not ask to be born to two people drowning in a debt they took out from Keystone Advance, who was going to grow up in whatever house his frightened, grasping parents could scrape together, learning whatever they had it in them to teach him. That baby was my grandchild, Walt's grandchild, and whatever I thought of the two people who made him, and by then I thought a great deal, I was not going to let that child pay the bill for what his parents had done. So I set up a second trust, a separate one just for the baby, and I funded it, not with the house, because I was keeping the house, and not with anything Danny or Brooke could ever get their hands on, but with a good chunk of my own savings. The money 40 years of watching the pennies will build up if you are the kind of person who watches the pennies. Locked. Independent trustee, somebody neither parent could sweet talk, money for that child's education and his real start in life, and set up so airtight that his parents could not spend it, could not borrow against it, could not settle $1 of Keystone's debt with it. The child's, and only the child's. Ellen looked at me over her glasses when we finished it, and she said, "That is a generous thing you are doing, Fran, after everything." And I told her the truth. I said, "Ellen, do not mistake this for a soft heart. This is not forgiveness. I have not forgiven anybody. This is arithmetic done on behalf of the one person in this entire mess who has not done anything wrong yet. That is all it is. The numbers say a baby should not pay his father's debt, so the baby will not. That is not mercy. That is just the books coming out right. I could have let the lawyers handle the rest of it. That is the truth. Ellen would have been glad to send my son and his wife a cold letter on nice heavy paper and let them learn every last piece of it from a stranger in a suit, and I would never have had to look either one of them in the eye again. And Lord knows a part of me wanted exactly that. But I did not do it that way, and I want to tell you why. Because it is the whole heart of the thing. Some lessons a person can only learn if they sit and watch it happen. If it comes in the mail, they get to tell themselves a story about it forever after. The cruel mother, the paranoid old woman who cut them off out of spite. But if it happens right there in front of them, in the light, one piece of paper at a time, then there is no story left to hide inside of. There is only what is true. And I wanted my son, for once in his whole soft life, to have nowhere left to hide from what was true. So I did what my grandmother and my mother had always done in that house when something important needed saying. I made a Sunday dinner. I made a pot roast because some weapons are a warm meal. I got out my mother's good china, the set that had come back down off the high shelf, and I set the table proper, cloth napkins and all. I called Jean, and Jean drove in from Indiana, and got there early to stand at my shoulder, and Ellen was reachable by phone the whole evening, though I did not say so out loud. And I invited Danny and Brooke, and I invited Brooke's mother too, because I knew missing it would eat at her worse than sitting through it, and I am not above a little of that. They came on a Sunday evening into a house that smelled like a childhood none of them had actually had. Danny gray and quiet, not meeting my eye. Brooke polished up and wary, her belly leading her into the room ahead of the rest of her, her eyes going straight to the locked office door and then away from it. John at my side like a soldier, Brooke's mother in her good coat sizing up the china. We ate first, I insisted on it. Nobody was going to be able to say afterward that they had been ambushed on an empty stomach. We even talked about the baby, and I will tell you, for about 20 minutes, it was almost pleasant, almost like a family, and Brooke thanked me for the roast and seemed genuinely surprised to find she meant it. And there was a moment where I looked around that table under my grandmother's light and felt the old ache of how it could have been if they had just been who they pretended to be. Then I cleared the plates, and I did not let anybody help me. And I came back to the table, and I sat down, and I set a box in front of me. It was Walt's seed box, a flat wooden thing he built himself out of cedar scraps that he used to keep his seed packets sorted in out in the greenhouse, tomatoes in one row, peppers in the next, all in his blocky handwriting. It still smells like his workshop if you put your nose down to it. I had cleaned it out, and I had filled it with something else now. And I rested my hand up flat on the lid, and I reached over and I clicked on the little green banker's lamp I had brought in from the office and set at my end of the table, the one I had done 40 years of other people's books under, and it threw that low green glow across the cloth. Before this all gets finished, I said, I want to do it properly, where you can see it with your own eyes. Every person at this table has been told one version of these last few weeks. The version where a grieving, confused old woman lost her grip and locked her own son out of his rooms and started acting crazy. I would like to show you the other version. Not shouted, not in a phone call. Right here, on paper. And then every one of you can decide for yourselves who at this table actually needs looking after. Danny's jaw went tight. Brooke went very still and very blank, which is what she does instead of showing her cards. And then I opened the box and I laid it out, one page at a time, slow and deliberate, the way a banker counts out a fortune, which is more or less what I was doing. This, I said, and I set down the first page, is the deed to this house, recorded to my grandmother, then to my mother, then to me. 3 names, 3 generations of women, 1 line. Your father's name has never been on it, Danny, because your father married into this house and he knew it and he was proud of it. And your name has never been on it either. This was never the house Dad built for you. Dad did not build it. He built a greenhouse in the backyard of a house that was mine. You grew up so sure this place was coming to you that in 38 years it never once occurred to you to walk into the county office and read a single line of the public record. That is not a crime. But it is the root of everything that has happened in this kitchen. Brooke's chin came up at that. This, I said, and laid down the next pages, is what my colleague Rose and I pulled from the public record over the last few weeks. Keystone Advance, the confession of judgment you signed, Danny, the second lender out of Delaware, the lien from the supplier, the contracting company that went under owing half the county. And this is the total. I laid that page down last, and I watched them both look at it. I have known about all of it, I said, since the morning I got to the mailbox before you did. I know exactly how far behind you are. I have known the whole time. The color went right out of my son's face. He had not known that I knew. He had thought this entire time that he was managing a confused old lady who had gotten stubborn about a bedroom. Now he understood. He had been sitting across the breakfast table from someone who had already read the whole book while he thought she could not find the cover. This, I said, and laid down the sealed envelope like it was made of glass, is a complete cognitive evaluation, done last month by a board-certified physician up in Columbus. 2 hours of testing. Cognition intact across every domain. No impairment of any kind. I bring it tonight because certain people at this table, I said, and I did not look at Brooke. I did not need to. have been very busy on the telephone telling this whole family that I am losing my mind. I looked up then. I am in my right mind, dear. I always have been. That has been the entire problem all along. The quiet in that room had a weight to it by then. You could have set a plate on it. And then the last pages. This is a living trust and a power of attorney, signed a couple weeks back. Every dollar I own now sits behind it, this house included, and the people I have named to stand in for me, if I ever truly cannot, are my sister and my attorney. Not you, Danny, not you, Brooke. And this, I touched the last folder gentle. This is a separate trust for the baby, funded from my own savings. Locked up tight with a trustee neither of you will ever charm. It is for his schooling and his start in life, and neither one of you can spend it, borrow against it, or hand $1 of it to Keystone Advance, in case that was going to be the next thing anybody asked me for. I folded my hands on the table under Walt's lamp. And that old will, I said, the one you were counting on, the one where I left it all to you, Danny, that one is gone. Revoked the day I signed the trust. A will does not move a living woman out of her bedroom, son. It never did. You just never bothered to learn the difference between a promise and a deed. For a long moment, nobody said one word. And then Brooke did what Brooke always does. She reached, quick as a reflex, for the version of the story where she was the one being wronged. You cannot put this on us, she said, and her voice was climbing. How are we supposed to know the deed was only in your name? Who keeps a thing like that a secret from their own family? You let us move in here. You let me plan a nursery. You let me get attached to that room. And now you rip it all away to teach us some kind of lesson. You set us up. This is a trap. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I had the lamp and the paper in 40 years, and none of those three things has ever once had to shout. I did not set anyone up, Brooke, I said. I let my son and his pregnant wife live in my house, rent-free, for 14 months, while I buried my husband and grieved him. I assumed, foolishly, I will grant you that much, that two grown adults living in a house they did not pay a dime toward might think to be grateful, or might at the very least think to ask whose room they were taking before they handed the woman who owned it the keys to the small one. That was my mistake. That is the only mistake in this box, and it is mine, and I own it. The debt was yours. The lies to my sister were yours. The plan to have me declared and managed out of my own life. One polite little room at a time, that was yours. Not one bit of that is mine to carry, and I am done carrying it. It was just a bedroom, she said, quieter now. I know, I said, that is exactly the whole problem. You looked at a woman who had just buried her husband of 40 years, and you saw a logistics issue and a refinance. You only ever saw the house. In 14 months, you never once saw the woman who owned it. Brooke's mother started to say something then, in her good coat, and I turned and looked at her just once, and I said, real quiet, you taught her how to look at people. I would sit this one out, and she sat it out, and then my son finally spoke, and when his voice came, it cracked right down the middle the way it used to when he was a little boy, and the world had stopped making sense to him. I let her do it, he said. Mom, you are right. I let all of it happen, the chair, the pictures. I sat at this table and I helped plan out loud how to get you used to one room. And I knew. I knew the whole time it was wrong, and I did it anyway. Because I was drowning and I was scared, and letting it happen was easier than telling you the truth. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. I did to you exactly what I have done my whole life. I took the easy road, and I was going to let it cost you your home, to cover a debt I was too much of a coward to ever tell you about. Now here is where the tidy stories lie to you. In the tidy story, that is the moment the son becomes a hero. He straightens up, he becomes a new man overnight, everybody weeps and hugs, and it is Christmas. That is not what happened, and I promised you the true version. What happened is my son told the truth for maybe the first time in his adult life. And it was real, and I believe he meant every word of it in that moment. And it did not fix him. A man does not get 38 years of choosing easy knocked out of him in one Sunday dinner, no matter how much his mother might wish it, he confessed. That is not the same as changed. I let him cry because sometimes that is the whole job of being a mother. You let them cry and you do not rush in to fix it. But I did not tell him it was all okay, because it was not all okay, and I was not going to lie to make the room feel better. When he could talk again, he asked me the same thing everybody eventually asks me. How are you so calm about all this, Mom? And I told him, because the house was always mine, Danny. Nothing that actually mattered was lost here tonight, except some things you believed that were never true, and those needed losing. And because calm is the only weapon I ever found that people who try to move you out of your own life cannot argue with, you cannot fight a woman who is not yelling. There is nothing to grab onto. Then I told them how it was going to go, because mercy and consequence can sit at the very same table, and I had raised my son well enough once to still know the difference. Here is how it goes, I said. I am keeping this house. It came down 3 generations of my family, and it is not leaving my hands, not to a bank, not to Keystone, not to anybody. So the two of you are going to need somewhere else to live. You have got some weeks to find it. I will cover the deposit on a rental, first and last month, a real start, and I will help you carry every last box out to the truck myself. That is the mercy part. Here is the other part. I am not paying the Keystone debt, not $1 of it. I want you to hear me clearly on that, because I know it is what this whole thing woos for. That debt is yours. You signed it. And the surest way to keep a person drowning forever is to keep hauling them up out of water they jumped into on purpose. I have been hauling you out your whole life, Danny, and look where it landed all of us at this table with these papers. So no more. You are going to face that number the ordinary way, the hard way, the way everybody else has to. A payment plan, maybe a lawyer to talk about bankruptcy, which is a real option and no shame in it. And I will even tell you which questions to ask. A second job. And you are going to do it standing on your own 2 feet for the first time in your life. That is not me being cruel. That is me, finally, 38 years too late, stopping being the reason you never had to learn how to swim. Brooke opened her mouth, and I could see she was going to argue about the deposit of all things, which told me she still, even then, had not understood a single word I had said. And my son, my quiet, easy son, did the one thing I had never once seen him do in the whole of their marriage. He put his hand over hers on the table, and he said, Brooke, don't. Not one more word. And she, for the first time since I had known her, closed her mouth and kept it closed. It had taken pulling a man's whole comfortable idea of himself right out from under him to grow my son 1 inch of spine. But there it was, 1 inch. Better late than never, I suppose. Though I have learned to be careful about how much I hang on 1 inch. Now let me give you the ledger, the real one, the way it all actually settled out in the months after, because I know you did not sit through all this just for the feeling of it. You want to know the numbers came out right. They moved out about 7 weeks later. I covered the deposit like I said I would, and I carried boxes until my back ached, and I did not pay Keystone one thin dime. And that debt did to my son what 14 months of my helping had never managed to do. With no house to refinance, and no inheritance to borrow against, and no mother left to bail him out, he had to actually face the number. Ordinary and hard and slow, a payment plan, a second job driving nights, a hard conversation with a bankruptcy attorney. His pride went through a wood chipper, and it was his. For the first time, the mess was his to clean up, and slowly, clumsily, he started cleaning it. The rift did not heal up nice. I want to be honest with you about that because the stories always lie about this part too. Brooke never apologized. Not once, not really. She is not built for it, and I have stopped waiting on words that are never coming. For the longest while she went right on, being exactly who she had been at that table, telling the cousins I had robbed my own grandson of his home, looking straight through me at the hospital like I was a pane of glass. Some of the relatives who had joined her little chorus of concern called me up later, embarrassed to apologize, the kind of apology that comes too late to mean much, but still counts for something. And I took them, and I quietly made a note of who never called at all. I kept the house. Of course I kept the house. I moved my things back into the master bedroom, my mother's room, my grandmother's room, and I hung the pictures back for good. And that first spring, I went out to Walt's greenhouse, the one he built me board by board, that had sat full of boxes and dust for more than a year, and I hauled every one of those boxes out, and I cleaned the glass, and I put my hands back in the dirt. By July, it was full again. tomatoes and basil, and even a few of Walt's roses. The whole thing smells like him again. Warm dirt and green leaf and rain on the glass. And some evenings I take my coffee out there and I tell him how it all went. I think he would say I did right. I think he would say, that is my Fran, she kept her own books. The baby came on a cold Tuesday in November, furious about the whole business, with his grandfather's exact frown stamped right onto his little red face. And the first time they set him in my arms, I had to sit down in the chair. But I will tell you the true thing about that too, because I owe you the true thing. It is not warm between us the way a grandmother and her family are supposed to be warm. It is careful. It is scheduled. It goes through Ellen and through the trust and through arrangements. And there is a distance in it that I do not think will ever fully close. And that is a real loss. And it is one I carry. You do not get to protect yourself from people who tried to file you away and then also get to have them close. I chose the deed. And the deed cost me the easy warmth I might have had if I had been a different kind of woman, willing to lose a different kind of thing. I made my peace with that trade. But I will not sit here and tell you it did not cost anything. It cost plenty. The trust is locked and growing, doing quietly for that boy exactly what his grandfather would have wanted. And that will have to be warm enough. People ask me sometimes whether it was too much, whether I could not have just sat everybody down and had a conversation instead of calling a locksmith before I had even finished my coffee. I had conversations for 14 months. Conversations are the whole thing they were counting on. They will let you talk forever, so long as you keep agreeing to move one room down the hall. Talking is how they walk a woman all the way into the guest room of her own life, one reasonable little sentence at a time. The morning I stopped talking and picked up my keys was the morning I stopped getting smaller. So here is the last thing a retired accountant has got to give you, and then I will let you go. Your home and the room you take up in your own life are not up for a family vote. Not ever. Do not let one soul, however much you love them, walk you politely down the hall into the small room to make themselves comfortable. When somebody hands you a story about how it just makes sense, you go and you check the ledger. You read the deed with your own two eyes. And when you find your name on it, and it is your name, honey, it is yours, you stay right where you are. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me I got it right, and I will see you next time.